theme that brings it home to this South African flavor. One of the things we are known for in our diplomacy, in our interactions, is around unity and being a unifier. This has been lauded lauded as an opportunity for South Africa to play the role of unifier, to build that bridge between the global north and the global south. Would you see it? Would you say that that is an apt characterization, Peter?
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's been some very detailed technical discussions on that theme between the global north and the global south in the work streams. We've certainly seen that around the climate discussions, around adaptation financing that's been talked about a lot, where you basically need the cash from the north to come to the south, to put it very crudely. But also I think you can only be a unifier for people who want to be unified, and I think that's why we've now seen South Africa stepping on the front foot a little bit in terms of a more aggressive stance around the US's non-attendance. And of course they've got people like Macron last night saying and backing South Africa, moving forward. Of course we're going to wait to see what the thing that comes out tomorrow is called. The US has said very bluntly they don't want it to be called a communique. I think we probably are going to get it called something cheeky that sort of pushes the line a little bit with the US. It won't simply be a chair's statement. There will be something a little bit more as South Africa tries to keep that unifying sense through to the communique.
Yeah, very importantly there as well. So the lead is still streaming in, and I believe one of the leaders from Sweden had just passed through a moment ago, and now we're still getting what looks like Michael Martin there. If I'm not mistaken, I could actually be wrong on this
I think
one.
It is Michael Martin. He's obviously the president's obviously just come back from Ireland. He was there on a trade and investment visit with his trade envoy.
Interesting weekend to not be in Ireland when the Springboks are playing Ireland.
I know nothing about sport, so I'm not commenting on that.
Fine, we'll leave the sporting conversations.
You don't want to spark another international incident, do you, Peter? All right, it's not just us in studio, and we've got a vast roster of our senior reporters and journalists here on the ground at the Media Centre at the Nasrec Expo Centre, which is where all of this is unfolding today, but we're fanned out across the country. Yeah,
we certainly are. That's where Karinda Jagmohan is joining us as well out of Durban this morning to get some more conversations. Just a little bit earlier, we were talking to environmentalists and how that was a key discussion point to be had around climate and the environment. Karinda, what have you got for us this time?
Certainly. Well, good day to you. It's not just environmentalists joining this march, also members from Abahlali Basem Jondolo. This has been a network that has been representing communities on the ground. So you see the march is actually going to come past us, but I've got the Deputy President, Mr. Bonono. Thank you so much, sir, for taking the time to speak to us. As Abahlali, you see the G20 leaders gathering in Johannesburg, but tell me, what's your view? What do you want to see in terms of outcomes?
Thank you so much to Newsroom. We are here today as Abahlali gathering together in South Coast Durban, marching against fuel, trying to protect our sea. As we know that here in South Africa, good things and bad things are happening as we're speaking right now. There's a big meeting in Johannesburg called G20. The G20 that has brought so many countries together to come and discuss about people's struggles and people's communities. As Abahlali, we really feel that the impoverished communities, they have been not given a chance to form part to those decisions that are going to be made up on those meetings. And it is clear that as those countries and the state of countries that meeting together, we know that they are going to make big policies that are going to affect the poor communities, but the poor communities have been excluded from those discussions.
So, and let's just say this, right? We've got the situation in countries all over the world where there are impoverished communities that are excluded from development. So if you had to give a message, and perhaps let's step a bit away, if you had to give a message to the leaders that might be watching, what kind of investment do you think would be needed at this time for underprivileged communities?
Of course, we know that as impoverished communities, the major challenge that we are facing is unemployment and the poverty and the inequalities. So we think those leaders, when they have those discussions in those meetings, they must plan from below. They must plan for people who are really suffering. We're saying all the states, they must tax the rich, because the rich, they got so much in their plates. But while the people who are working hard in the communities, they got nothing in their stomach.
And just quickly before we wrap, what do you make about the politics of it all?
Yes, we have seen the Premier of Johannesburg, what he have done to impoverish communities in the street, just because he wanted to hide poverty, and then he wanted to hide the inequalities that is taking this place. We know those big meetings that when they sit together, their politics, it always goes against the poor communities.
Well, Mr. Bonono, thank you so much for your time. And Imam, sorry for that, the noise there, but it's really the community that is protesting. And you'll just take a quick peek at those that have gathered. Quite a number with signs saying G20, listen, communities count, total chaos on our coast. They're pointing out to some environmental calamities they say is continuously happening, and they need more justice for essentially communities on the ground, saying there needs to be investment into actually impoverished communities to ensure that all people, or essentially that there is development on the ground as a grassroots organization.
Corinda Jagmohan, thank you for that update. Incredibly important to see how this connective tissue reaches from the big and massive macro discussions happening here at Nasrec with those world leaders and the host countries' citizens on the ground whose experiences may not translate or may not be beneficiaries of the conversations happening here, at least not directly, and at least not from their perspective.
Just to make note now, critically, the leader of the G20, the president of the G20 here in South Africa, the president of the country, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa, having officially arrived here at the Leaders Summit. Also now greeting some of those leaders arriving today, handing over from, or taking over from his deputy there, Paul Mashatile. So some of the leaders will now be greeted by President Cyril Ramaphosa, who has been very, very adamant that this G20 would be successful no matter any of the discussion points that you hear across the board around other conversations too. So this was very important for him, and he had made note of that as well throughout this year, and a very important year it certainly was. All right, with the leaders continuing to stream in, we're going to head off to my colleague Ziniko Mhlaba, who joins us, I think, still out of Cape Town, if I'm not mistaken, too. And really the commentary here and some of the words really being said by some of the ordinary South Africans who feel this conversation may not still be leading up to them. Actually, in fact, it might be in Soweto. I think it was earlier this morning. Let's cross on over to Ziniko as we see even Lula da Silva, actually the president of Brazil, coming through and arriving here in Nasrec. Ziniko, I'm not sure if you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you now, Arabile. Yes, we are still out in Soweto, in Cape Town. And one of the major issues, Arabile, that is set to be discussed, in that Johannesburg summit that's taking place at Nasrec is the issue of inequality. There is research that has been done by various institutions. One of those institutions is Oxfam. They looked at the prevalence of inequality, regarding income here in South Africa, and they did declare that, well, the income gap in South Africa is very much, it's a big problem at a crisis level. And if you're talking about income levels in South Africa, you do have people who are working in corporate or working in government. You do have people who are dependent on social grants, whether be it is for disability or senior citizens. So I'm in Soweto now. I'm going to speak to one gentleman, Mr. Lusiti, who's originally from the Eastern Cape, but has been in Soweto for the past 20 years. He's living with disability, and he's a classic example in terms of the impact and the effects of living, on a social grant in South Africa, comparing to other people who are professionals. I'm going to bring him in. Lusiti, ndiyabulela tana ngexesha lakho. Namhlanje inkokheli zelizwe ababizwa ngobana zi-G20 leaders zilapha eGauteng namhlanje zizothetha ngengxaki dongalingani kwabantu apha eMzantsi Afrika. Ngicela usixelele wena uba xa kuthethwa ngongalinganwa zintoni ii-challenges ojongana nazo imihla yonke, ubomi bakho nje bunzima kanganani njengomntu ohamba ngesitulo?
Hey, ingxaki zam zininzi. Indawo yokuhlala, amanzi, imali yegrant endiyifumanayo engandilinganiyo, transport ukuya le kumasibhedlele iyandisokolisa. Zininzi nje, angazi ndingachaza ndithini.
Khasicacisele tata, khawucacisele umuntu obukeleyo into yokubana xa usithi unengxaki uhlala wedwa apha, into zokuhlamba impahla, ukuya evenkileni, njengoba uhlala apha eKliptown akho strato esinetar road apha. Khawusicacisele uba loo nto ichaphazela njani imihla ngemihla, uxelele nje umuntu omameleyo mhlawumbi.
Ukuya emashop ezivenkileni, heyi kuba nzima. Ngoba noba ndithi ndithumela umntu akezi nale nto le endithi ndiyayifuna. Usajonga imali ukuthi le mali le ingayilingana noba yintoni, athathe loo nto. And ukuye khona lapha emashop ufuna ndithathe i-distance ndihambe ndiyojika le cause indlela ayikho. Ndihamba kuma-potholes and ne-wheelchair iyafa, kufuna ndihambe ndiyise khona le nansikene ekliniki ilulungisa.
Le mali karhulumente tata enyangeni uthenga ntoni, uyisebenzisa njani le nto usithi incinci nje? Khawusixelele ii-costs zakho nee-expenses zakho zenyanga.
Kufuneka ndithenge imilimili, ndithenge iflawa, yonke igrosari nje, ingoneyili. Phinde futhi ndikhostwe ngamapampasi ngapha. Ipampers eyi-1 na 10 phakathi. Njengoba ina 10 phakathi yenza 100 and close to 200. Ziyi-10 nje, so ngenyanga nje funa ndibhatala into eziphaa koma-800 for amapampers.
Ungathini kwiinkokheli ezizabe zidibane eRhawutini namhlanje? Ndithi uMongameli Ramaphosa uzawubukela le show iNewsroom Africa, zintoni ongathanda bazilungise, especially for abantu abahlala kwiindawo ezinje, specifically abantu ke ngobahlala ne-disability?
Endingathanda uba nendawo yam, ndihlale nje endlini erayithi, indawo endihlala kuyo ibe rayithi nje kahle.
That bisithi ndiyabulela kakhulu tata ngexesha lakho. Ndiyabulela tata. Arabile, that's Mr. Lucity. He is living in Kliptown in the informal settlement, just narrating to us some of his daily challenges, from struggling to go to the nearest main road where he can get transport whenever he needs to go to get medication, but also saying that the social grant he's dependent on is not enough because he needs to buy pampers, he needs to buy food, he needs to hire people who need to come and help him with laundry responsibilities as well. But the fact that there's no electricity as well, so these are all the challenges that are reflecting, which has been debatable because it's an issue that has been raised by the countries in the global south, feeling that the issues of solidarity, the issues of equality, the issues of sustainability must be discussed. But however, the global north is saying that those are not their priorities, therefore they cannot be focusing on issues that relate to or reflect some issues of communism. So that's the situation here in Soweto, as we keep giving you the insights in terms of what the situation is on the ground. So it's back to you, Iman, for now at Nasrec.
Thank you so much, Zaniko Mhlaba. And as Arabile and I have been saying this morning, it's not only about what happens in the room, but it's what happens in communities on the periphery of these conversations and how invested their hopes and aspirations are in decisions that are made here. Arabile, we have 13 minutes till the top of the hour. 10 o'clock is when proceedings here officially kick off. In Plenary Hall 6 is when the opening session is set to begin. We're expecting a very short address by President Cyril Ramaphosa as the host of these proceedings. You see him there on the red carpet, having taken over from Paul Mashatile before the closed session begins, and it happens between 10:15 and 2 o'clock this morning. And it's all about these central themes that Corinda, Zaniko, and other members of our reporting team have been focusing on. Inclusive and sustainable economic growth that leaves no one behind. Building economies, the role of trade as well, financing for development, and the debt burden. There's an Africa expert panel that are going to be presenting their recommendations and reports, as well as the extraordinary committee of independent experts on global wealth inequality. The media will be staying exactly where we are, here in place at the media center, while those discussions in that closed session take place.
Yeah, we'll give you all of that live coverage, of course, and included in part of that live coverage is these leaders who are arriving right now. We've already, just a moment ago, actually, just saw the Prime Minister of Australia, that's Anthony Albanese, having greeted President Cyril Ramaphosa. We saw Abiy Ahmed Ali, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, so too Pedro Sanchez, the President of Spain. If I'm not mistaken, this looks like Giorgia Meloni, the President of Italy. Indeed, that is as well coming into proceedings this morning, as Iman said, just moments away from the start of all of this. And again, it's that unifying nature that we've continued to speak about here today, joined in our studio still by Peter Montalto, macroeconomist at Crutham Consulting. It's the ability to bring in all these people, and this is a moment really to be celebrated as well.
Indeed, and these countries have deep ties to South Africa, let's not forget. I mean, Italy was one of the earliest investors in the renewable energy power program. Pedro Sanchez in Spain, similarly in energy in South Africa, and now in future probably in transmission investments as well. So there's a lot going on between these various bilateral relationships as well. But in particular, obviously, Giorgia Meloni was interesting. She's been known as a Trump whisperer. She was sent to place, I think, next to Trump earlier in the year or a few months ago at the meeting he held at the White House with the president of Ukraine. And so interesting, even though the US isn't here, some people who are close to him certainly are.
So this is the G20. The conversations have been dominated by the developmental or the trade agendas of the major players, your United Kingdom, the United States, even in absentia, and some of the other players as well. But let's talk about Asia. China, India, Indonesia, Japan, got South Korea. I saw some of the Turkish delegation, the reporters from the media delegation represented from Turkey. Let's talk about what some of the other objectives are going to be from the other representative member states. Exactly, and we're just seeing João Lourenço arriving, who is obviously not only from Angola but president of the African Union as well. And I think there's a key demand here that people like that step up in terms of AFCFTA, which keeps coming up, actually needs to be operationalized. It's waved around a lot as a way of dragging faster growth in Africa, but a huge amount of work still has to go on. You mentioned those Asian states. Let's not forget that President Ramaphosa came back just now from a country tour around various different places, Indonesia and Malaysia in particular. There's been a big Vietnam day yesterday. I think they opened the JSE yesterday morning. These bilateral relationships are really important as South Africa tries to diversify trade away from the US. That is, of course, now a stated government policy aim of the national government and particularly the Western Cape working on that as well. We're already seeing a pickup in fruit orders from Asia, offsetting some of those lost orders from the US. So some of these things going on around the outside with these nations are very, very important for South Africa's stability and economic well-being.
Yeah, so important to have that. Just looking back still at some of the faces to have arrived as well this morning. We just had João Lourenço, the president of Angola and chairperson as well of the African Union. So representation there of the African Union still coming through. So we'll continue to follow these for you. And I think, again, Peter, to the conversation you've just been having there too, is really around the Trump whisperers, as we've continued to talk about. As one of them actually said,
exactly. Faisal bin Saud just arriving from Saudi Arabia. Of course, South Africa, one of the biggest changes in bilateral trade relationships in the last few years has actually been with Saudi Arabia now exporting a lot more meat, milk products to Saudi. But of course, a pivotal country in particular for the Middle East. It's of course been a key country to deal with some of the legacy issues around Gaza in particular. South Africa, of course, I think has been keeping diplomatic channels very much open with the Saudi government, given its interest in what happens to the Middle East as well. That topic probably not coming up a huge amount specifically in the G20 sort of communique, but these ideas of global peace, how those sort of issues are dealt with the US not here, is going to be very interesting to watch in the rest of the day.
A very busy man yesterday, Antonio Guterres, doing the rounds, talking to as many media personnel as possible. He has just arrived there, about to shake hands with the head of state, and just preceding him not too long ago, His Highness Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, having arrived. So the delegates are arriving there thick and fast because we've got this deadline to meet. This is by 10 o'clock. Everyone should be seated in the room, the President firmly at the podium in front of the mic, extending a formal welcome and a formal opening of the G20 Leaders Summit. And the gravity of the moment should not be lost on us. We've commented all morning long about how smoothly South Africa has managed this. We've heard from Dirk also managing last-minute diplomatic squabbles between Pretoria and Washington, some unsavory language coming from the U.S. Press Secretary, Christine Leavitt, talking about the president running his mouth in terms of his response to that communique from the U.S. Embassy about who they want to send at this 11th hour to basically take the baton and move on as the U.S. Assumes the presidency of the G20. But a lot to be proud of in terms of our own organization. Johannesburg is, Peter, do you live in Joburg, right?
That's unsure. I commute between the UK and here. So, yes, I'm here very regularly.
Okay, honorary Joburg,
Yes.
Joburg resident. And a lot of us are just asking whether the flowers and, you know, some of the sprucing up, the makeover that Joburg's gotten is going to be a legacy that is left behind for us to enjoy. Some of us a little bit still skeptical.
And raising expectations. And I think that's obviously so important with local elections next year. Yeah. People will demand clean roads. They'll demand flowers around different places. And I think it adds an interesting spin to next year's metro elections.
And they'll know that it is possible.
Exactly,
right?
and all at the last minute, pretty much. I mean, there were some dramatic roadworks still in Sandton, which were a bit annoying with the B20 there. We had to have a bit of drama. But overall, I think everything's gone pretty smoothly on that front.
Yeah. Turkish President Erdogan arriving as well, about to shake hands, press the flesh with our own President Cyril Ramaphosa. And it's been an interesting not only 24 hours since those planes began touching down. We know that some people, I think the German delegation touching down only this morning.
Yes.
Right, Arabile?
Yeah.
So
even the Dutch delegation.
And the
too.
Dutch delegation, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands also arriving in South Africa. The Netherlands is also interesting in terms of, you know, their involvement in all of this. Not an official G20 member. Am I right?
Indeed, but often invited along, and obviously a key part of the European Union in terms of one of the core founding members, and also, of course, very long, complicated history with South Africa. But obviously, also the home of
complicated is a very interesting choice of words.
I was trying to think of a word there, but also, of course, the home now of Prosus, which is the parent company of Naspers, as well.
Yeah, very significant. Yeah, we'll continue to watch as the leaders begin to pour in. As we've been noting as well, that that deadline for 10 o'clock becomes very interesting, with President Cyril Ramaphosa still, of course, greeting some of the leaders when one looks at the schedule as well, as we've been trying to follow it. It is around 10 o'clock where things are meant to kick off in earnest. And it is a short speech that we had been looking toward for the president there, President Cyril Ramaphosa. We'll continue to give you more updates here because, as you can tell, just some of these leaders still just continuing to stream in for us this morning. Just so far, some of those that we've seen just a little bit earlier, even Sir Keir Starmer, who himself has continued to try and make more pledges to emerging economies, including South Africa too, in trying to get just a little bit more work done. And he's really just gone around the world, really, on
45 countries, I think, in 3 years. I think there's the moniker that's been ascribed to him. Peter, you'll know more about this. Never hear Keir, I think, Was the moniker attributed to him?
Indeed. Well, some of the UK vibes at the moment are a bit negative. I prefer to think about upgrades in South Africa and the like. And we have a budget next week in the UK,
Exactly.
which is also potentially rather depressing. Again, trying to not think about that.
For planes, trains and submarines, what this means for domesticated job creation.
Indeed, and I think there's a lot of FDI potentially about to flow between various countries. I mean, there's a huge amount of infrastructure investment from the UK potentially into South Africa as we see concessions coming on the railways, as we see third-party rail access happening, as well as a lot of energy investment. In London, we've had a lot of ministers. Recently, Barbara Creasy, with my other hat in the UK Chamber of Commerce, we were hosting her recently. A huge amount of demand from investors to see her, given the reforms that are happening in that front. The JSE hosting their big SA Tomorrow conference now in March next year. We'll see key people the investors want to talk to, like Rudy Dix, talking about reforms as well.
Yeah, so we'll continue to monitor that. And the French President, Emmanuel Macron, also making his way through into the Nasrec Expo Center for the G20 Leaders Summit. And a really pivotal voice, when one must say, yes, in Europe, de facto leader in some ways, some might say, to Europe outside of Ursula von der Leyen, but also just to South Africa's cause when it comes to the G20. He had been one of those leaders that had noted that he would still be supporting this declaration, whether the US was involved or not, because he believed that there still was consensus on a whole host of those issues. Let's talk about how important that was as a thumbs up to South Africa's G20.
Exactly. These leaders like Macron have had a problem. They have had to go on bended knee basically earlier in the year around Ukraine issues to the US. They've all had their own tariff issues and negotiations going on, such as through the EU. There were deep dissatisfaction from French farmers in particular about the deal that the European Commission had actually negotiated. So I think this gives them a little bit of an out to stick two fingers up maybe at the US by backing multilateralism and backing this statement in a soft way. But no, I mean, huge issues still going on. I mean, the EU is still trying to negotiate lower tariffs and some opt-outs. What we've seen in many of these trade deal cases is initial framework agreements are done, such as with the UK, such as with Indonesia, that countries then start backtracking on, or the US backtracks on. And really, actually, I think people don't realize we haven't actually really signed final trade agreements, just these initial framework agreements. And that's what we're watching around South Africa. Can we get a framework agreement in place? We're quite skeptical, given you can actually form an agreement potentially on goods, but then it's all the BE and all the other stuff around it, we think, starts to create the problems.
And there's the other woman of the moment, which we met and encountered earlier this week, EU Commissioner there arriving as well. I just want to pick up on the French visit, and we can talk about the EU. You want to go quickly?
I think it's very important. I think she's deliberately arriving towards the end. There has been a big pivot in South Africa's foreign relations to reinforce the relationship with the EU. Ursula von der Leyen has obviously hosted Ramaphosa in Brussels 6 weeks ago. It's only one of 12 global gateway partnership countries. And really, the EU likes constantly reminding me they want to be a predictable and dependable partner. If you go on their website about South Africa, it's all hashtag predictable and dependable. And it's about basically being seen as a partner that is reliable through this global volatility. And I think that's why we're seeing her arrive towards the end and is going to be feted, I think, as one of the key people here.
I want to pick up on the arrival of Macron, and what's interesting is that he also, with Paul Mashatile, was hosting to commemorate the French citizens who had played a role in contributing to the fight against apartheid in South Africa. But we know France has had a very complicated relationship with the continent as a whole, especially in the Francophone countries. And we can see that right across the Sahel region, where those coups d'etat have almost been in response and retaliation to their own complicated history with colonialism. Where does France sit from an opportunistic point of view with the continent? And I hate to speak about the continent in such a reductionist way, because we're 52, 53 odd, however many countries you want to include or exclude, as an entire bloc. Where do they sit now in that post-colonial era in a G20 context, with the AU being a part of the G20 in terms of their own trade and other aspirations?
Well, the idea of post-colonial here is interesting because the ECOWAS and other countries have their reserves still managed by the French Central Bank. That creates a huge amount of pushback from activists. It's a weird hangover. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, the French have done quite well at this. I mean, there is a certain amount of economic stability that's come with it. But clearly, it's deeply politically unsatisfactory the way this is happening. And often the French are called to come in and provide security, particularly in northern Mozambique, given Total's investments there. That created huge problems around, again, accusations of sort of colonialism and then them sort of coming in on helicopters to provide security. So it's a very, very fraught relationship with the continent overall. And actually with South Africa, given the lack of history of France in South Africa, has been an easier relationship, I think, between Macron and Ramaphosa. A lot of jet funding, of course, coming in here as well from the French. We've seen quite a lot of that move.
So important. We're seeing just the president then of the Republic of Korea, Lee Jae-myung, coming through as well. Just before him was Antonio Costa, of course, was the former Prime Minister of Portugal between 2015 and 2024, is now the president of the European Council. So Europe really making itself present in conjunction with the conversation we've just had around Europe's significance. And Peter, do you think that's because of a slight tilt away, maybe not away, but a slight tilt to recognizing that the US is not wanting to play such a pivotal role, so we need to find other places and other areas in which to focus on, whether it be South Africa, but even for the broader African discussion?
Indeed, and let's not forget the EU is the largest trade bloc with South Africa. It's also very much the case that there's a lot of money flowing. So whilst we've seen PEPFAR funding obviously dramatically reduce, it's just restarted in a small amount. But basically, the EU is providing a lot of overseas development aid into the continent as a whole, and particularly South Africa. The relationship with the US has been much more commercial. Let's not forget that the US is maintaining very strong relationships with the Lobito Corridor countries. The US turned up here in size again at the mining Indaba in February. We've also seen actually the US turn up in South Africa at various renewable energy conferences and things. They want that commercial relationship to continue, certainly to their benefit, whilst obviously a lot of drama on top. But I think it's the full package of diplomacy, funding and commerce is really what the EU is trying to position itself with, the US just doing maybe one of those.
What do you think this does, though, for the US's presidency next year? And here where I'm going with this, just because if a lot of these leaders were determined to agree or at least ratify South Africa's own declaration here, what does that mean for especially the allies to the United States, even current President Donald Trump, whether it be Saudi Arabia, etc.? What does that mean, do you think, for that relationship headed into next year? Do you think that those economies still get the thumbs up from President Donald Trump?
Well, there's been a huge amount of pressure behind the scenes, we understand, of countries and allies of the US not to agree to this thing. As we know, we're debating what it will be called to come out. I think they're ignoring that. They are pushing back on that. But we've seen, obviously, Venezuela in particular deciding not to come. But we'll see what happens, I think, overall next year. It will probably be a quite domestic-focused issue there. Tech, in particular, AI, crypto, these things probably coming front and center. And so a wobble, I think, will then pick up many of the same multilateral themes with the UK hosting in 2027. But we'll see if South Africans are even invited. South Africa and South Africans. We've obviously seen the Lady Pandor's visa revoked this week.
Without explanation.
Well, I think it was probably obvious why, given the speech she recently gave, the Nelson Mandela lecture. But no, the US doesn't necessarily always explain these things. I think the real question, obviously, is can B20 people go there? Can business people go there next year to ensure some continuity? We saw a warm relationship between the US Chamber of Commerce and BUSA at this week's B20.
They often say that Washington and New York are two different places for that reason.
Well, and Miami as well. I mean,
exactly,
it's in Miami next year, probably at or near Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
And again, that was not the first time that has happened strategically. Donald Trump, kind of steering things towards his own profitability in a sense. I want to talk, and of course we're going to apply for our visas early, Arabile, so that we can all make it to the US. Hopefully we won't have our visas revoked or rejected. But let's talk about, it's now 7 minutes after 10 o'clock, so we're expecting this official portion to kick off momentarily. Perhaps if this is our last opportunity to ask you a question, Peter, well, it may not, because this is only expected to last about 15 minutes or so.
Yeah. I'm here to 12, I think.
Thank you. We'll paid for the full hour. We'll just keep you here for the entire day. What does success look like? And I guess it's a nuanced question because to whom would be the follow-up. But what does success look like for a great G20 hosted for the first time on African soil in South Africa, from your perspective?
Well, I think it's subtle. I think at the start of this presidency a year ago, the bar was maybe raised a bit too high, both by business and by DIRCO, in terms of what one can achieve. And you have to remember that South Africa is taking part in this long, multi-decade sort of conversation that goes from G20 to G20. It's about having your finger on the needle more than specific outcomes. But we've seen, obviously, the success already, I think, detailed research and advice coming out from the various high-level panels, in particular on inequality, on African debt. I think we've seen the conversation changing around African debt. We disagree with a little bit around, I mean, think some things around the sort of overpricing of debt and stuff we disagree with a little bit, but there is a very broad, interesting point there that's going to get taken up and will continue next year by the IMF and World Bank at their spring meetings, as an example. The finance track things will keep going. But it's about shaping this long, long conversation that happens between countries. And I think that's where the success is, and where we can probably say South Africa has had a success in putting key issues on the agenda.
What are you foreseeing could be the risks that perhaps might be unanticipated in this moment? And also, if at the end the US throws another spanner in the works, or there could be another wild card, overnight. It's not unexpected.
Exactly. So, I mean, we're watching very closely what happens if they do call it a communique, for instance, and they say there is an agreement amongst the parties. Is there a reaction back? Now, we struggle to understand what that is, because, well, that could be. Sanctions, tariffs, these sorts of things are far too dramatic. We don't think that will happen. But there are a range of still underneath the surface bilateral cooperations that could be cut. So we're waiting to see the reaction back from the US to a successful G20, basically, let's be honest. And there may be some announcements, say on Monday or so, to think about that. It may well impact the trade deal negotiations as well. South Africa's already sort of not at the top of the pile, we think, on those issues. It could be put further down the pile as a result of having a G20. But we're probably going to avoid the drama if Vance was here. We were expecting a Munich Security Conference style speech about BE and things. That stuff won't happen. We were expecting them maybe to bring up Israel and that kind of stuff. That won't happen. So I think the amount of drama we see here this weekend is probably going to be moderately limited. It's about the US reaction that maybe comes at the start of next week.
You've just brought up something very interesting, and we're in the midst of still the conversations around the Middle East. Ukraine and Russia are still happening, and yet that didn't occupy as much focus. In fact, I had been reading somewhere as well that the belief actually from the International Relations Department is that those were easy conversations to have and agree on. What wasn't is all the other matters, and it's elements that you were part of, like climate, for example, that were perhaps a little bit stickier. Don't you want to just talk to us about what you saw with regards to that?
So there's stickiness around these climate things, and we obviously have just